Welcome to The Explainer. We all hear it, right? The AI revolution is going to create trillions of dollars in value. But who actually gets rich from it? That's the real question. Today, we're diving into Jerry Neumann's fascinating argument that says the real winners, well, they might not be who you think at all.
So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with that big trillion-dollar question. Then we're going to look back at two totally different revolutions in history to see what we can learn. After that, we'll figure out which path AI is on and wrap up by tracing where the money is actually going to end up.
All right, let's get right into it. The trillion-dollar question, where does all this value go? Look, we all know AI is a world-changing technology. That's not even up for debate. But, and this is a big but, its impact on society is a totally different thing than its impact on your investment portfolio. You know, for any new tech, there are always two big questions. First, how much value will it create? And second, who gets to capture that value? Now with AI, the answer to question one is easy, a ton. But that second question, who actually gets to pocket all that cash? Well, that's where things get really interesting and honestly, way more surprising than you might think.
Okay, so to understand AI's future, we've got to look at the past. Let's start with our first case study, a revolution by surprise. We're talking about a technology that basically blindsided everyone, and in doing so, created a whole new generation of wealth. This is the story of the microprocessor.
So the microprocessor revolution was a total surprise. I mean, even the folks at Intel who invented it didn't really get its full potential. And the big guys like IBM, they just completely ignored the early personal computer market. See, because its path was so unclear, and because anyone could just grab one and start tinkering, it was totally permissionless, it created this perfect little sandbox for real innovation to happen, way outside the shadow of the big corporations.
And this is key. It wasn't some overnight explosion. Just look at this timeline. It was a slow burn. We're talking about a whole decade of hobbyists and startups just messing around in a market that, for the longest time, nobody really thought they needed. It took until 1981 when IBM finally woke up and smelled the coffee for the establishment to even take the PC seriously.
And you know what? That long period of being ignored by the big players was actually a blessing in disguise. It acted like a protective moat around these little startups. It gave companies like Apple the breathing room they needed to experiment, build a passionate community, and actually grow a real sustainable business before the giants showed up to the party.
Okay, now let's flip the script completely. Our second case study tells a totally different story. This is about a revolution that everyone saw coming, and that, my friends, changes the entire game for investors. Let's talk about the humble shipping container.
Yeah, so back in 1956, a guy named Malcolm McLean put some boxes on a ship called the Ideal X, and the benefits were just blatantly obvious to everyone. This wasn't like the PC starting out in some garage. Nope. The second those containers were loaded, everyone in the shipping industry knew this was a total game changer.
Now, it wasn't all smooth sailing. McLean ran into a wall of opposition. You had longshoremen worried about their jobs, port authorities worried about the chaos, railroads worried about the competition. But here's the thing. The economic logic was just too powerful to ignore. The ability to seamlessly move freight, slash loading costs, and make shipping predictable, the cost savings were so huge that everyone knew, deep down, this was inevitable.
And this right here, this is the core problem with a predictable revolution. Because the idea was so good and so obvious, what happened? Everybody jumped in at the same time. There was no time to build a moat, no time to get a head start. The result was a bloodbath, a massive rate war. Profits got squeezed to nothing. And the innovator Malcolm McLean, he ended up having to sell his own company. All that incredible value didn't stick with the innovators. It got competed away and passed right on down the line.
All right, that brings us to today. We've got our two models, the surprise revolution, like the microprocessor, and the predictable one, like the shipping container. So, where does AI fit in?
So, is AI a surprise like the microprocessor, or is it predictable like the shipping container? This is the trillion-dollar question, right? And according to Jerry Neumann's analysis, the evidence is overwhelming. AI isn't some surprise that just snuck up on us. No, it's the predictable next step, the culmination of a 50-year wave of information and communication technology.
And when you put them side by side, it's kind of spooky how much AI rhymes with containerization. The efficiencies are obvious, check. Immediate competition from all the big players, check. Incumbents jumping in right away, you bet. We're already seeing price wars starting. It's crazy capital intensive. And the endgame looks like consolidation, where all the value flows right through the AI companies and ends up with their customers.
You know, the famous economist Joseph Schumpeter had this idea that whenever something new is introduced, the innovator gets this little temporary monopoly, a moment where a competition is suspended. But what Neumann argues is that for these predictable late-wave technologies, that just doesn't happen. With AI, there was no timeout on competition. It was a complete free-for-all from the very first day.
Okay, so if the AI companies themselves are just going to be stuck in this endless price war, competing all their profits away just like the shipping companies did, where does the money go? If you're an investor, where on earth are you supposed to look?
Let's break down the AI value chain. At the very top, upstream, you've got the suppliers. Think NVIDIA making the chips. In the middle, you have the model builders like OpenAI and the app layer companies building on top of them. And then, downstream, you've got all the regular businesses that use AI to improve what they already do. The core argument here is that the money won't stick in the middle. The competition is just too fierce, and it's going to force all those model and app companies to pass the savings right along.
So what does that look like in numbers? Well, the vast majority of the financial benefit, we're talking something like 70% of it, is going to get captured downstream. It's going to be scooped up by the companies who use AI to get better at their own business, and then ultimately it flows to their customers.
Just think back to the shipping container. Who got rich? It wasn't the shipping lines. The ones who made out like bandits were companies like IKEA and Walmart. They took that cheap, predictable shipping and used it to absolutely supercharge their business models. The lesson for today? Don't invest in the AI version of the shipping line. Invest in the AI version of Walmart.
And this all leads us to the final, and I think most important, and maybe even most optimistic takeaway about what AI really means for all of us.
Think about this for a second. Over the last 100 years, things like mechanization and automation made physical stuff, food, clothes, you name it, drastically cheaper. Back in 1918, over half of a household's budget went to just food and clothing. Today, it's down to 16%. That drop freed up a massive amount of wealth for consumers.
And that's the ultimate point here. AI is set to do the exact same thing for knowledge work and services that the Industrial Revolution did for physical goods. So the greatest value AI creates, the true revolution, won't be about making a few investors rich. It's going to be passed on to all of us, to consumers, in the form of cheaper, better, and more accessible healthcare, education, and finance. It's a massive boost to consumer welfare. So for decades, right, the way to make money was to bet on what the hot new thing was. But this analysis flips that on its head. Now you have to bet on the opportunities that the new thing opens up for everyone else. It's not about picking the winning AI company anymore. It's about finding the companies that will use AI to change their own game. And that right there is a fundamentally different way to think about the future of technology and where to place your bets.